Hello everyone, welcome to yet another 2-Minute Tuesday. This will be the third week in a row that we're talking about business rules, but this tip is actually pretty interesting because last week we talked about scopes within business rule and how important it is to select the right scope, right? Whether it is to do it as at the entity level, which means that it will make this business rule look like a plugin or act like a plugin, or by selecting all forms or a single form and making that business rule work like JavaScript. Now, the problem is that you notice that there's a gap in these options that we have for the scope. There's a gap in there. You can either select one form, so a single form. You can select all of the forms, or you can select entity and run it as a plugin. So there's really no way for you to pick, let's say, 3 forms. And I've done projects in the past where I've had, 8 forms or 10 forms or whatever it is. And perhaps you have, let's say, out of those 8, 3 of the forms are for customer service. And the business rule you have created is customer service only. So you don't want to apply it to sales. So how can you do that, right? You cannot apply it to all forms. You cannot apply it to more than one. So what do? If we only want to apply it to 3 out of 8, for example, do you create the business rule all over again? Do you do save as and just recreate the business rule multiple times? You can definitely do that, but that's not what we're here for. We're here to think outside the box and come up with a functional trick. So let's start the countdown and let's go. So what I'm going to do on this one is I'm actually going to select all forms, but I don't want it to run in all forms. We already established that. So all I have to do is I have to include a field that will only be present on the forms that I need it to run on. Now, if I'm doing this in a real project, this is a trial environment, obviously, but if I was doing this in a real project, probably customer service will have fields that the other teams wouldn't be using anyway. So I would be able to use their fields as my condition. But the idea behind it is, remember that once we switch to all forms, this is working like JavaScript, which means that it will only run if all the fields are present on the form, right? So what I'm going to do is on the condition, I'm actually going to add a new condition. Now, because I don't have in this trial environment multiple forms and be able to leverage other fields, what I did is I added a custom field into the contact entity. And you can absolutely do that. So the contact, the new field is really easy to spot. It's called, I think it's called execute address requirement business rule. So there it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if the field contains data or whatever it is. So you can say equals no in this case because it is a Boolean. It's a yes or no. And by default, I have set it. I left it by default, which is it's always no. So it will always have data and it will always be no because I'm adding it to the form, behind the scenes hidden, or I am not adding it to the form on the forms that I don't want this business rule to execute. Now, I mentioned in the past that I'm not a big fan of having fields hidden behind the scenes, but in this case, because we really want to execute it in 3 out of 8 or whatever it is, our options are kind of limited. Now, again, you can create a bunch of business rules and, duplicate it and obviously get around the need to have a field on the form. Although, if you're doing that and you are essentially doing one by one, the fields have to be present on the form anyway, whether you're going to hide them or not. But, what I'm doing right here, again, I'm trying to get around that by clicking apply in here. Now there's a condition that counts that field. And again, if it goes through the form and it doesn't see that field, it just skips it. It doesn't run it on it. So once again, the idea is you add this field behind the scenes hidden to the forms that you want this business rule to execute on. So you leave it in all form, add the fields to the form that you want to run the business rule on, and that's it. It works only on those forms. So I hope you enjoyed the tip this week, and we'll see you next week.